How are you doing, class? This is your last video of the semester. Again, I'm your instructor, Reyes. I don't have the fancy studio setup today. Um, just got, a book there, books there, my personal bookshelf here in my apartment, and we're gonna talk some. Um, I want to talk about my aims and what those have been for this class, and just future directions and what's left to do for the semester. All right, so first thing is, one of the things that I've um, thought about during the class in the course of it is that I didn't want to put too much of an emphasis on moral categories or categories in general. I wanted you to come to your own conclusions about a lot of the topics, and just with the material I do have. Some of you are from disciplines outside of philosophy, and I thought that I wanted to see your take on philosophical concepts and for you allow you to be able to blend as much as you can from the books and the topics here. Blend them as much as you can with your own personal disciplines. So I've tried to remain as open as I can to your points of view. With that being said, of course, right? There is some basics to moral philosophy that should be adhered to, that have been portrayed through the books and, in some sense, through the lectures and my comments to you on Blackboard and over email. Um, so my outlook, my perception on the landscape in philosophy is that I haven't been the outlook that I've been practicing from is some, I guess, in the analytic world would call moral particularism and moral pluralism. Some might consider these to be categories of nihilism or relativism, and I think I wouldn't totally disagree, but I think that there's a way to make relativism work in such a way that you're not simply saying that what I believe is morally true, just in virtue of the fact that I believe it. And I've explored those topics here in this class. So this is part of the reason why I don't emphasize too much on utilitarianism and deontology. Utilitarianism coming from the tradition with John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, and deontology is most closely associated with Kant. So, in part, I apologize to those that thought that you would get um, more of an overview on ethical theory. This has not I have not practiced this class as being an ethical theory class. That this class is global moral issues, so I've tried to take an issues approach to the topic. I'm sorry, I've tried to take an issues approach to the class. Right, so we started off with the Gordon's book of Divine Warning, and that had a hermeneutical analysis and, and semiotic analysis on several topics therein. So it gave you a strategy for looking at disaster. And within each chapter, there were many topics. Some of them were related to colonialism and race. Some of them, which I don't think anybody, at least nobody wrote about it. There's also an emphasis on, well, I guess it's related to colonialism, but nobody touched on the topic, at least in this class from you, that they have an argument where there's terra blanca, which means like kind of like blank slate, but for land. And when the colonizers when European colonizers arrived to the Americas, a lot of them saw the territories the territory that is now the USA and Mexico and Honduras and the Caribbean. They saw that as a blank slate, as in the social contract theory, and they didn't see the people already living there as nations. So they didn't see them as being a collective group of humans that were similar to them. That just didn't, that's not how they operated. So none of, at least nobody wrote about that, but it's related to colonialism. Then after that, we moved on to write the Cosmopolis book, which had a very, which is a fiction book, but it deals with a lot of topics related to this class. The power of the wealthy, and how the different philosophical views on the economy. A lot of you focused on Eric's journey throughout the book and his emotional journey and how he sees the world. But implicit in that, or just throughout the whole novel, there are serious debates and positions on finance. Like, is finance part of the natural world or not? Can it be modeled? Is the world fundamentally indeterminate? What is the role of time in consciousness and in society? Those are big questions, and they were in that book. After that, we moved to the topic of marijuana legalization. O'Rourke and Susie Bird, they give you a sustained and clear argument, factually based, and a clean argument from a philosophical standpoint on the legalization of marijuana. It's one of the cleanest arguments I've seen on the topic, and there is a legalization movement in the United States, and there's pushback against it. And I thought, a lot of people, especially at your age ranges at the college level, either kind of take it as a given that marijuana should be legalized, or you kind of don't care. And I think that for those that don't care, you should care. And for those of you that already believe in it, you need to have your facts straight, because you can't just take it for granted. You can't. It's just like the topic of racism that I explored in the first audio lecture. You hear a lot about why racism is bad, and a lot of people believe that. But if somebody doesn't believe that it's a bad thing, and you don't have justifications to back yourself up other than, well, it's what I learned in history class, right? Like, we released the slaves in the USA, so that's just right? No. You need to have justifications and reasons for what you believe in, especially for the bigger topics, and especially when they're hot topics. So I think marijuana is akin to that, and that's why we read that book. After that, we moved on to Everything Begins and Ends at the Kentucky Club, and that's by Benjamin Alida Sainz. And while it's an emotional journey, that book. That book takes you on an emotional roller coaster. A lot of the stories are similar, but they all have very different voices in them. And a central theme there that you can explore philosophically is borders. And a lot of you picked up on that and wrote about it and wrote pieces about it, so I appreciate that. And at this point throughout the semester, we had been talking about land grabbing, and I guess at that point you were also starting to read the Ethiopia chapter along with The Singer. So I think the land grabbing book is a fantastic book. It's a phenomenal book. It's not strictly a philosophy book. Some of you have described it as a philosophy book. It's not a philosophy book. It's what I would classify, and others would classify, as critical journalism. Journalism, anything You could look, you could see bias in every single thing in the world. You're not going to get away from that. That's just what the social world is. There's culture that brought you here along with altruism, right? There's a group of people that brought you and me to this place right now. And there's just bias everywhere. You can look at it that way. Um, so a lot of people might look at the Liberty book and think it's just a biased book against globalization. No, it's not just that. Could you give it a kind of reading of that? Sure. I'm sure that you could find a kind of. I'm sure you can make a more sustained argument for bias, but it's not an anti globalization book. It's not an anti free market book. It's not. You can't reduce it, and part of that is because it's critical journalism. It tries to straddle the line of ideologies, and sometimes some people might think he fails, sometimes not. Um, and journalism, by its very nature, can't be biased. I'm sorry, journalism, by its very nature, has a point of view. It has to. And when you're dealing with international journalism, your point of view has to expand because you're not just dealing with one nation and certain social categories. You're dealing with many nations, and the web, the network there is just a lot. It's a lot bigger. And Liberty tries to give you the facts so that you can explore them philosophically and critically. Some of you are going to go into finance in the future, and when you get to a certain point and you're managing a team of people, what are you going to do about it when you're asked to do an analysis of a company